Hi everyone. In this brief lecture we're going to be talking about expectations and stereotypes. This obviously goes along with chapter 5 in the Ward and Mama text. So most of us have probably heard of expectations before. Usually places of employment have them, or sometimes people in positions of authority have them. Something like the expectation here is that you'll show up on time for your shift, or the expectation here is that you'll do X, Y, and Z by a certain date or something like that. Most of us have expectations related to a lot of things. Here's just sort of an example that maybe is coming out of right field, but is actually something that's very relevant to the kind of work that I do. I've mentioned before that I'm an alcohol researcher, and most people have what we call expectations with regard to alcohol. So most people know what happens when they have one or two or three drinks. They also know what happens if they start to have more than that, 4 and 5 and 6, and people know that they start to get, they start to lose control. They start to not remember things. And they actually use those expectations to moderate their drinking. And believe it or not, people have expectations as far as what other people do. We have expectations about what how our friends and people in our social circle drink, and we could get into that, but suffice to say, this is among all of the things that we're going to talk about. Expectations, like perceptions and stereotype and generalizations, are all of these ways that our mind helps to make sense of the world. The world is a very complex place, and our minds have developed all these sort of shortcuts to help to make sense of the world, so that each new situation that we encounter isn't completely brand new to us. It helps us make sense of the world. By the way, I'm not sure if you could hear that, but it's just started to thunder outside. So if there's any noise, that would be the thunder. So expectations are one thing, and we've got them for just about anything. Most people have expectations about what certain food tastes like, and we use those expectations to either tell us to eat that food or not, right? So again, this is just sort of ways that we make sense of the world. Perceptions are this idea that we take in information based on our 5 senses. Stereotypes are perceived and relatively fixed ideas about, usually a group or a social status. They can be adjusted. Part of social work practice is adjusting stereotypes, but they are fairly fixed. And then this idea of generalization, which is a term you encounter a lot in research, but it's used in sort of lots of different places of social work practice. Generalization is the idea of forming an idea or judgment from some kind of prompt. Okay, so one way to think about generalization, when anyone asks you a question, even something as simple as "How are you today?" The process of thinking about what the answer is generalization. And so when someone says, "How are you?" We do all these sort of calculations to think about it. Okay, is this person asking to be polite, or are they genuinely interested? Are they, do we have time for me to talk about how I really am, or should I respond with, "Hey, I'm great," sort of a perfunctory kind of response? What's the context? Who else is listening? And we do all this stuff in an instant, right? In the sort of blink of an eye. Suffice to say, we generalize, probably hundreds, if not thousands, of times a day. if you if you answer a question on a quiz or a test or a survey or something like that, that's you're generalizing there as well. That's the process of forming your response to any of those questions. So we enter the field placement really with lots of let me put myself down here, with lots of expectations sort of placed on us. Obviously we have expectations about what we're going to learn. The school has expectations about what the hosting agency will provide. Your supervisor has expectations about you and how you perform and stuff like that. But one of the groups that we want to think about here, or one of the groups whose expectations we want to think about here, are our clients. What is it that clients expect of us? Frankly, clients show up and don't necessarily, aren't necessarily asked to be placed with an intern or something like that, or a student still. But sometimes that's what they find them. That's sometimes the place that they find themselves in. Sometimes clients are uncomfortable with interns, and that's okay. There are also clients who are sort of will sort of view it as their job to help train interns, and so they're okay with it. The thing to say, or the thing to do, is really to be honest, right? That's sort of the profession's position on sort of the status of an intern. But then assure clients that you're completing your degree, that you're qualified to do the work that you're doing, that you're in close contact with your supervisor, and that your supervisor in the agency is very invested in your growth and development as a social worker. Very rare is it that clients sort of dismiss a social work student out of hand. In fact, in all of the years that I've been doing it, I can count on one hand the times that's happened. But I was also going to, since I sort of skipped over these here. So this was sort of going back to this idea of expectations, and the ideas that the agency, the agency has expectations of us. We have expectations of the agency and things like that. The key here is that we use these expectations again to guide our behavior, right? To sort of tell us what's normal, tell us what's falling outside of the ordinary, and again to sort of guide and discipline our behavior. I guess I kind of covered this. So I mean, I guess our no matter what your let me say this. So no matter what your status is as a social worker, your client, of course, is always going to have expectations. Sometimes clients expect us to fix them with sort of the wave of a magic wand. And more often what we have to do is sort of realign our clients' expectations when that's the case, so that they understand help as a process, and change, kind of change as a process. That often takes the form of education. Sometimes we have to educate clients about what it is we can do and what our role is and what the limits of our role is. But sometimes we're also that comes with experience as well, and sometimes just working with clients helps to develop that knowledge in them. Let's see here. Let me just put myself up here. So stereotypes tend to come from responses or previous experiences with someone. Sometimes stereotypes are taught to us by parents or other caregivers or teachers or something like that. And a big part of becoming a social worker um, is is starting to recognize our own stereotypes and challenge them. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's a very emotional thing to do because that often means sort of challenging an entire set of beliefs upon which our lives can be based and things like that. But that's what you have supervision for. That's what we have sort of reflective practice for. That's what we have sort of ongoing reflections for, and that kind of thing. The other kind of definition of generalization that's important to know here um, is what's on the screen here, and that's a sweeping characterization of an entire group based on just a few examples of that group. So, for example, saying that uh, all protests are looters, or all protesters are looters because a handful of in a demonstration of maybe thousands of people, a handful of people looted or destroyed property or something like that is an example of a generalization. And while generalizations, again, their point, sort of from an evolutionary standpoint, is to help us make sense of the world. They also are things with which we have to we be sort of careful. And although they're not sort of as poisonous as maybe as stereotypes are, maybe not sort of as troublesome as stereotypes are, we still need to be aware of them and not generalize, particularly in the context of our clients when we're working across cultural, racial, socioeconomic, gender, religious lines, that kind of thing. Microaggressions is a term that you'll probably encounter a couple of times throughout your MSW program. Microaggressions are often what the form of oppression takes in sort of these modern kind of contemporary times. So gone are the days of sort of overt racism, overt oppression, sexism, overt kinds of discrimination, where people are using really awful language, really hateful kinds of insults and things like that. Microaggressions are sort of a very polite form of oppression and discrimination. So an example of probably a micro invalidation would be if someone says, well, I'd like to tell you about this time that I experienced a discrimination, and the person to whom they're speaking sort of turns away or disregards them or doesn't let them speak or something like that. That would be sort of an example of a micro invalidation. There's all kinds of sort of microaggressions, telling jokes that are sort of inappropriate or bordering on offensive. Um, 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 Micro insults, that kind of thing. Color blindness happens when people proclaim that they don't see color, and they often do it sort of with benevolent or altruistic intentions. The thing that makes colorblindness so problematic is that um, uh, difference shapes how a person moves through the world. So a person can choose not to, or can choose to not form opinions of a person based on their color, or the color of their skin, but they do need to acknowledge that when people of color move through the world, it's a very different experience than it is for people who are white or for people who pass as white. And then dysconscious, that's actually a typo on the screen there. It should be DYS. Dysconscious racism is a form of racism where people sort of refuse to challenge status and privilege. They sort of take all of that stuff for granted, and just as a part of what's what's normal and appropriate. So again, the function of a lot of the stuff that we encounter in Word and Mama text is to prepare you for things that you're going to encounter later on, and these microaggressions are part of some things that you'll encounter in your social work education. This is stopping our own proclivity towards microaggressions is sort of the same process as challenging our stereotypes and generalizations. It all comes from a place of understanding how our presence affects others, and how what we say is either helpful or harmful, even if we're saying things with the best of intentions in mind. So with that, I will end. Thank you as always for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day.